Let's talk about the internal market bill. Now, I know, framing out for the listeners, this is something that's been talked about a great deal by the SNP initially in Westminster. A lot of questions were asked about it, but many people will just say, yeah, we're fearful of this internal market bill, but it would be useful to flesh out what does it mean now and what could it mean as we roll forward for what the Scottish Parliament is able to deliver. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
So in terms of the internal market bill itself, it gives the UK government the power to legislate and spend directly in areas of devolved decision making. That is, in a nutshell, what it allows them to do. And it's just the first, I think, in what will become a series of adventures by the UK government to try to undermine the Scottish Parliament's ability to decide on devolved matters and to be able to deliver for the people of Scotland. So, for instance, you've got the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is to replace EU structural funds. That is obviously going to be what they consider to be a UK-wide scheme. It's going to be delivered by the UK government. They're going to be spending money directly in Scotland on areas of devolved responsibility. You've also got the Towns Fund, the Levelling Up Fund, all these areas that are going to be spending directly in Scotland by UK ministers, which should be done by right by Scottish Government ministers. And I think it's going to become all pervasive, because I spoke in my last speech to the Commons was in a bill called the ARIA bill, which is to deliver a new research and invention agency, which is going to have government funding, UK government funding, and is going to allow riskier investments in scientific and inventive practices. And that is also likely to be a UK-wide scheme that's going to be spending directly in areas in Scotland that should be under the purview of the Scottish Parliament. So I think the danger here is it's not just going to be isolated to the terms of the internal market bill, where it's going to give the UK government the powers, as I say, to undermine the devolved settlement, to bypass Scottish ministers and their areas of responsibility that we have elected them to. We elect the Parliament in Scotland, and by return the Scottish Government, and that is going to be changed, and it's going to be UK government ministers that we don't elect, that we have not elected a Tory government in Scotland for coming up 70 years now, and we're going to be seeing these Tory ministers spending directly in Scotland, undermining the Scottish Parliament, undermining devolution, and pushing their vanity projects. And also, you look at the Shared Prosperity, the Towns Fund, the Shared Prosperity Fund, the Levelling Up Fund. In all of these areas, the criteria by which you can apply for funding or achieve, the bar in order to get funding is very grey, very woolly. It's not entirely transparent as to how it's working. And there are major complaints across the UK that the money is getting funneled into either Tory target seats or Tory held seats, clearly without great need, in order to bolster their support, whereas the areas of real need are getting left behind once again. And it is the worst type of politics that we could see, very dangerous, and certainly very dangerous for the future of the Scottish Parliament.
Yeah, and you make a couple of really, really important points here about democratic scrutiny and accountability. If decisions about spend are forced upon Scotland, that Scotland hasn't voted for, but also cannot critically scrutinise. And let's face it, the Tories aren't going to scrutinise their procurement processes, for example, if they know that they've not gone through the normal channels, which is what we've seen with alarming regularity during the COVID crisis, Also, the thing that I've been pointing out to people is that to whose priorities will these projects be? They won't be the priorities of the democratically elected Scottish government. They will be to Tory priorities. And we already know that on matters that we hold really dear in terms of decarbonisation, for example, our green agenda, our green ambitions, they may want to push further projects that we fundamentally disagree with. And I think this is going to happen more and more. And I posted up an example today on my blog, on my website, and also a video about the recent moves to try and threaten the Scottish Government's wish to protect children in terms of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And now the Westminster Government are threatening to take the Scottish Government to the Supreme Court for wanting to pass this legislation, when the legislation itself is fundamentally there to protect children. So given the fact that they say, no, they want to be able to pass laws that they are obviously concerned if they're already enshrined under Scots law, makes you then think, wait a minute, they want to retain that power to make laws for Scotland that may not comply with the rights of the child.
Yeah, and this is why this election is going to be so important, Michelle, because it's obviously about electing local champions, about electing your local member of the Scottish Parliament. It's also about electing the next Scottish Government, which is going to be fundamental to the recovery from COVID. But it's also about our future, and fundamentally, who is it that gets to decide about our economic recovery, the principles of our economic recovery? And we're already seeing, like you say, the skewed priorities of the UK government challenging the implementation of the rights of the child in Scotland, from a social perspective, but also from an economic perspective. You look at the priorities that were meted out by Rishi Sunak at his budget. It was all very much on a spend up front now, but by gosh, you're going to have austerity on stilts to come. And that would be absolutely devastating. We have to remember that during this COVID pandemic, we have had almost independent control of our public health policy. The big areas where we've not have been around borders and around the economic impact of public health. And you wonder how more successful we could have been during the COVID pandemic if we had full control. But imagine what is going to come in terms of the economic recovery if we are not the ones that are deciding our economic future. And that is going to be a fundamental question that we need to ask, is when the time is right, do we want to be independent, and do we want to have control over our own economic decision making to make sure we're not relying on the nonsense that's coming from Westminster, that austerity on stilts is coming down the tracks?